one of the most popular of the mother of all talk shows guests. My next guest is the most popular, with the single record clip of 225,000 views, an audience of millions over the many times that he has appeared on the show. It's always important to hear from him because he is in Ukraine. He's a Chilean filmmaker and analyst, and he's there. He's clear and he's present. I hope, Gonzalo Lira, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Gonzalo, I saw a very powerful piece from you today about the German people. Just summarize what was your message to the German people in the video I saw from you today.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on. It's always a pleasure to be on your show, and it's a delight.
Thank you.
Yeah, the piece I posted today is basically to the German people, because I have many friends in Germany that I am, of course, in touch with. And none of them have heard of Cy Hirsch's piece that you were discussing with Colonel Black previously. And I was basically emphasizing the fact that they should be looking at this piece. I linked to the full piece that Seymour Hersh wrote. And I told the German people that basically their press and their government is lying to them by omission. Because I speak with very educated, very well-placed individuals in Germany, and none of them have any idea of the investigation that Cy Hirsch did that proves conclusively that it was the Americans in cahoots with the British and the Norwegians who destroyed a vital infrastructure and is making the German people, so far as energy costs, heating costs, food costs, inflation generally, because of this, not to mention the fact that due to the loss of the Nord Stream pipelines, German industry is cratering. I mean, we are seeing quote unquote deindustrialization of Germany, which really means the bankruptcy of small and medium and even large firms in Germany. The largest firms are actually starting to relocate to the United States. So this is a disaster for the German economy and the German people. And they should be aware, the German people should be aware that it's their own allies that have done this to them. The Americans and the Norwegians, all of them part of NATO, which is supposed to be this defensive alliance, but rather the members of their own alliance have declared war on them. It's really despicable. And it's despicable that the German government dismisses Mr. Hirsch's reporting as just, the one German official who mentioned it claimed that it was just a hypothetical and it was not based on fact, which is ridiculous. Everybody knows that Cy Hirsch is an incredibly diligent reporter.
Gonzalo, no article I have ever read has more facts in it than Seymour Hersh's deep dive into the Nord Stream. The fact that it's despicable will be common currency around certainly this audience, but I think more widely.
But I wanted to actually bring up something else, if I may.
Yeah.
Okay. No, what I wanted to bring up, you had a very good discussion with Colonel Black, so I think that the issue of Nord Stream is pretty much settled and we're all in agreement on it. The thing that I wanted to highlight, if I may, is that as of last week, there has been footage that has been emerging from the front lines here in Ukraine, where drones are dropping canisters of what seems to be chemical weapons. There has been various footage of what appear to be Russian soldiers dying from a chemical attack. And there has been footage of a refrigerator with dozens of canisters of what appear to be chemical weapons of some sort or another. It's not quite clear what chemicals they are, and the drones that are going to be used to drop them on them. And the people who filmed this video were very clearly Zelensky regime forces, and they were bragging about it. They allowed themselves to be very readily identified in these videos. And the thing that we have to ask ourselves is, are we escalating into a horrifying direction? Because Nobody in the American mainstream is talking about these videos of these chemical attacks that have been going on the front line. I have seen at least 2 separate incidents, and the manner in which they were filmed, and the fact also of that video with that refrigerator full of these canisters of chemical weapons makes it pretty clear that it is something incredibly noxious, lethal. This is chemical warfare. And the fact that nobody in the West is talking about this, and certainly not condemning it as they should, well, this will lead to escalation. Because, I mean, suppose that the Russians had used chemical weapons on the battlefield. There would be an uproar with these just 2 videos of chemical weapons and that additional video of a refrigerator full of chemical weapon canisters and drones to drop them. You know, there would be outrage in the United States, in the Western media. There'd be calls for a Security Council meeting. All kinds of brouhaha would be raised if the Russians were doing it. But since the Zelensky regime is doing it, and I'm very careful to identify it as the Zelensky regime, because I don't think that decent Ukrainian people would ever condone such a thing. The Zelensky regime, since nobody is saying anything about this, now they have carte blanche to expand this use of chemical weapons. And one has to ask, what would the Russian response be to their soldiers being killed by chemical weapons? This is incredibly serious, and there isn't enough attention being paid to this. As to what chemicals are being used, I certainly am not one who would know, but whatever it is, we have seen at least 2 separate incidents that I personally have seen. Clearly, it's something lethal. Well, and the fact that there were so many canisters and so many drones in that video footage of the Zelensky regime forces bragging about how they were going to use it, this leads me to conclude that there's going to be an escalation in chemical warfare on the front. And the repercussions of this could be catastrophic. I mean, we're really going into, we're marching blind into unknown territory. This is a disaster.
Yeah, we're going into First World War territory, not just in casualty levels, but also now in the weapons that are being used, which I've seen referred to as chlorine weapons, the very weapons that the West attacked Syria for allegedly using in Duma, something which has been contested now for the best part of a decade. So Syria was attacked by all of the NATO countries except Britain, because our parliament stopped it, for allegedly using exactly the same chemical weapon in Duma. Iraq, on the other hand, was literally annihilated on the suspicion that it had chemical weapons, biological weapons. We now discover that up to 46 biological weapons labs owned by, I'm not making this up, Hunter Biden and the Pentagon were actually seeded, laced throughout Ukraine. There's chemical weapons, there's biological weapons. This is a descent into World War I, which could become World War III, isn't it?
Yes, exactly right. Because the Russians are not going to take this lying down. Use of chemical weapons is universally condemned for reasons. It's inhumane, it's despicable, all the reasons. We don't have to go into them. But the point is, what will the Russian escalation to counter this be? And that is something that is we cannot predict, because we're in uncharted territory.
We are, but let's try and examine what the different options would be. We're coming up now to the first anniversary of the Russian special military operation, an invasion effectively of Russian forces into eastern Ukraine. We know the reasons the Russians have given for their doing so, but a year on, how looks the front to you? And where might we expect, in your opinion, as a civilian, but as someone living not far from where the front line currently is now, what might we expect to mark the anniversary of 25th February?
Well, likely by the 24th, Bakhmut will have fallen. Now, this has been a major battle that has been going on off and on since August, but really it's been becoming an issue over the last couple of months because the Zelensky regime has been trying to defend it at all costs. They have been pouring in men and weapons into Bakhmut, and the Russians have been just grinding away at all of these men and all of this equipment. And it is a catastrophic loss for the Zelensky regime, because not only have they put a lot of military effort behind holding on to this particular town, there's also the political dimension. And it will be a huge blow to the Zelensky regime when Bakhmut eventually falls. I mean, we already have signs that it's just imminent. And further issue is that as the Russian forces are encircling Bakhmut, they're going to wind up capturing thousands of troops, because that's kind of like the military inevitability of the situation. And so one has to wonder, what will the political ramifications be? Will the Zelensky regime still endure after this catastrophic loss? And it will certainly be an incredible blow to the morale of the Zelensky regime forces. And how will that play into Russian plans? Because at this time, the Russians have assembled an enormous army surrounding Ukraine. In the south of Belarus, on the northern border of Ukraine, on the eastern border here in Belgorod, and the south of Ukraine in the territories that Russia has annexed or occupied, as whatever you prefer to call it. And so this 700,000 man force, what are the Russians planning to do with this force? Because you don't put together an army that size for no reason, just to see what it looks like. No, they have a very clear plan of action insofar as all those men and all that equipment. Because these 700,000 men, they are loaded for bear, forgive the pun. They have tanks, artillery, aircraft, everything. They are ready for something enormous. Now, what that will be, nobody knows, because the Russians have been incredibly careful insofar as their operational security. So anybody who claims to know what the Russians are up to is just speculating wildly. Everybody is just waiting to see what the Russians will do. What is clear, though, is that with this amping up of the Russian army around Ukraine, in the steady grind that has been going on in the Donbass, the Russians have essentially upped the volume and the offensive effort across the entire front. It's not only Bakhmut, it's also Vuhledar. It's the entire front that they are ramping up and grinding ever faster and harder. And so the issue becomes, clearly the Russians expect some sort of breakthrough. How will they take advantage of it? Will they do specifically? Nobody really knows, but we are clearly coming to a point of culmination insofar as this conflict is concerned. The next 2 weeks to 2 months, we are going to see rapid changes, and it could be that this might be the straw that breaks the camel's back. We will see, but clearly something very big is on the horizon, and it's the near of very good military analysts on both sides. And most of them agree that something this month will be happening, something very big. But what is it exactly? Will the Russian army come from the north of Ukraine, out of Belarus? Will they come out of the east from Belgorod and cut around the city of Kharkov, where I'm currently located? Will they come all three? Or is there something else that they're planning? Nobody knows, but we are reaching a climactic moment, and it's happening now. What will the results be of this? How big of an effort is it going to be? How devastating will it be? Nobody knows, because depending on how devastating this attack is, this offensive is, will determine whether the Zelensky regime remains in power, or perhaps they flee, or perhaps there's a change in government altogether in Kiev and they start negotiating with the Russians, or perhaps there's a change of government and the new leaders in Kiev decide, no, we're going to fight to the bitter end. Nobody knows, but we are clearly reaching a climactic moment. And I think that your viewers should be aware of this, that this conflict has been going on almost a year. It is middle of it. And I can tell you that on a mental level, it's exhausting. But right now, you have to pay attention because something very, very big is on the horizon.
Finally, Gonzalo, and we'll let you go because you have other commitments. I've always thought that one possible end to this is something that you just alluded to, namely that someone, most likely in the armed forces, will decide that enough is enough, that Zelensky cannot possibly bring this war to an end, and that he will be removed. He'll be overthrown. There'll be some kind of military government will emerge that will negotiate with the Russians. I've always thought that to be, in a way, the most likely ending. I read today that there are increasing tensions between the chief of the army and Zelensky. Can you provide any insight into that?
Well, there have been a number of officials who have been dismissed because of charges of corruption. The Minister of the Interior was killed in a helicopter accident that was rather suspect insofar as timing is concerned. Not only was he killed, but his two top deputies were killed. And furthermore, four Ministry of the Interior officials resigned at the same time. This happened a couple of days ago. What does this mean internally insofar as Kiev politics? I could not tell you because nobody's really clear on it. What I can say is the following. The Russians have no intention of coming to any kind of agreement with Kiev. I think that they might make stabs at it, sort of like as sort of like a fig leaf that they're trying to negotiate. But I think that the Russians no longer believe either Kiev or the West insofar as any agreement is concerned. And my thinking at this time is that the Russians intend to capture the entire country because they believe that the West is, as they say, agreement incapable. And so they cannot trust the West in any kind of negotiations. A lot of people in the West right now are saying that maybe the conflict can be frozen and create some sort of demilitarized zone, like what happened in the Korean conflict. I personally do not believe that the Russians would entertain that notion of some sort of ceasefire in a DMZ area. Because, first of all, the Russian public is very much in favor of this conflict and they want to see it through to the very end. And number two, as I said, the West and the Kiev regime have shown themselves unwilling or unable to stick with any agreement. And the fact that Francois Hollande, Angela Merkel, and President Poroshenko, who were the three other parties to the Minsk II agreements, they have publicly come out and said that the Minsk II agreements were just to buy time for Ukraine to arm itself and prepare itself for a war with Russia. Well, that just leads the Russians to conclude that any kind of ceasefire that does not end with Russia holding the entirety of Ukraine up until the Polish border is not going to be worth the paper it's printed on. So I think that that is the ultimate direction of travel insofar as this conflict is concerned. Because, I mean, think of it from the point of view of the
Gonzalo, Lira. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Last word to you. Last word to you.
No, I think that this conflict, I would be extraordinarily surprised if this conflict lasts until the end of this year. I personally think that with this big offensive that will be occurring between now and early mid-spring, which will be decisive one way or the other, I think that this conflict will end one way or the other by the summer. This is, of course, presupposing that NATO doesn't do something incredibly foolish and perhaps try to widen this conflict by using Poland as a proxy, because that seems to be what the Polish leadership would like. They would like to get into this conflict. They have ancient hatreds of Russians for their own reasons, and they also have agreed for the lands of formerly the Galicia, which is the western part of Ukraine. So if this is just between NATO and Russia using Ukraine as a proxy, I think it will likely wind down by the summer. But if Poland positions itself as to the next proxy of NATO against Russia, then this conflict could go on for quite some more time. So we'll have to see. Nobody really knows what's going to happen, but clearly something big is about to happen.
Gonzalo, thanks for joining us. Stay safe. We need you very, very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
Now, our poll, God bless you. The UFOs over North America